Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your client's peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Beth Hand. My guest today is the co-CEO of MaxibleSpace.com, an accessory dwelling unit platform, and the co-CEO of GreatBuilds.com, Jon Grishpul. Jon, thanks so much for jumping on with me.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
Absolutely. So like I said before I hit record, I have so many questions for you because this is a space that is really exploding. Like, you are in the middle of an industry experiencing tons of growth that's happening. But before we dive in with all of my questions on that, I wanted to see if you would take just a few minutes to talk to our listeners a little bit about your background and kind of what got you into all of this space, this industry that you work in.
Well, it depends how far back you want to go. I'll say from a very young age, I grew up around very close to my family, and my grandfather was an electrician. And his form of daycare was coming out to the job site with him and tinkering around and handing him a screwdriver. So I was exposed to the construction industry as a whole from a very young age. My personal background is not at all directly related to anything that I do now. I have a background in marketing, in sales, and consulting, but I'd say the connecting path through all of that is my fascination and interest in technology, helping people, and becoming expert in anything that I can and sharing that knowledge with everyone that I can. So all of that has led me to what was the first business that I started, which was Great Builds. Truly, the real background comes from my business partner. He was in the construction industry for many years. He was flipping homes and did that for over 10 years and was also looking for the what's next. So I had finished with a consulting opportunity that I did for a few years. He was getting sick of the flipping and wanted to diversify. So we put our heads together and thought, what is a big problem that we can solve? What are we acutely expert in that we can share that wealth of knowledge around? And what we landed on was forming Great Builds. Because of my business partner Paul's background in construction, he knew that one of the main pain points in finding a contractor and remodeling homes is just finding someone that you can trust, someone that is reliable, ethical, that'll treat you, your family, and your home with respect. And we really did some digging and realized that it truly is a broken system. There is no true good way to find a good contractor and hold them accountable. And that's really what led us to start our first business, Great Builds.
That is really cool. It is so interesting how those young interactions with your grandfather did actually kind of come into play eventually down the road, even though you're kind of more on the tech side of it now. So I think that's very cool. One thing that I will say from the consumer side, who does not have any experience in this industry, is for an outsider coming in trying to get this type of thing done, it feels very, very overwhelming. You're not sure where to go. You're not sure who to trust. You really don't even know what questions to ask. So you talked to us a little bit about Great Builds. There are a couple of other things that you do as well, and we can dive more into Great Builds later. Tell us, so there's Great Builds, then you also have MaxibleSpace.com, and that's different. That is an accessory dwelling unit design and management platform. What does MaxibleSpace.com, what type of services does it provide?
Yeah, the ethos behind Maxible Space is exactly the same as my other company, Great Builds. Maxible fully specializes in helping guide and educate homeowners through the process of building an ADU. The concept here in California has been around for 7+ years in its current form, and the concept has been spreading rapidly throughout the rest of the country. So at its core, Maxible is a support It's a guide, it's a helpful resource to help homeowners through the process to demystify what goes into building an ADU, what homeowners need to know from a regulatory standpoint, from a process standpoint, and then certainly the service element of Maxable is helping people find reliable, trustworthy partners for the project. So just like Great Builds, we help them find contractors, but when building an ADU, you often will need a lender, you often will need an architect, surveyors, a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. So it's a little bit more complicated than a typical kitchen remodel. So Maxable really guides homeowners throughout California, start to finish throughout the process of building an ADU.
That's so interesting. I love that you're kind of putting all those pieces together for people who are interested in this, but for people who might not really know where to start or who to trust. So ADUs are a thing that have been, like I said, that's an industry that's been exploding. I feel like there are so many people that are interested in doing this and they're building these and all of these things. So what would you tell someone? How would you tell them to get started if there was someone considering an ADU? And if they're doing it like as a rental house, what does that do to income and property value, things like that?
Yeah, I always say the number one place to start is identify what your local regulations are. Here in California, they're created on a statewide level and then interpreted differently from city to county to city. So, first things first, before you start dreaming the perfect space, identify what parameters you need to work within. And the only way to do that is look up your state regulations, look up your local regulations. Many states are creating these regulations now. Not every state has them. So some people call them accessory dwelling units, other places call them granny flats or a type of tiny home. There's so many different terminologies used around this space. But first things first, figure out what you can do. And then the next step there is put together your goals, both short term and long term. The main value in a space like this is that it is so dynamic and flexible. I've helped homeowners build an ADU for the short term as a home office, but in the long term, they knew they wanted to rent it out. So when it comes to planning out the project, deciding exactly what you want to build and how you want to build it, thinking long term about how you want to utilize this space is so, so valuable. And to answer your other question about what is the impact, what is the potential of this type of project, it's in the long term adding value to your property. You are adding tangible, livable space to your lot. So it's just like think if you were to add another bathroom or add another bedroom to your home, the value of your property immediately goes up because you're making it a more valuable space, more livable space. The difference is with an ADU, it's fully independent. So it has its own kitchen, it has its own bathroom and somewhere to sleep at its core. And like you mentioned, if someone wants to rent it out, they often can. If they want to use it as extra space for the family, they can. And if they want it as a gym or an office or anything else, sky's the limit. So, you're adding value to your property, you're adding potential rental income, and you're adding more livable space to your home, whether it's for extended family to come stay with you, live in assistance if it's necessary, or one of the most common things that I see is either for boomerang children coming back from college needing a place to live, but they don't want to live at home. This is a little bit more independent. Similarly, aging parents who are looking to downsize and or the cost of assisted living facilities are just so expensive. A lot of families are realizing that an ADU makes a lot of sense for that situation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see why the era that we're living in has made these so popular for exactly what you just said. I mean, there are so many for the last decade, there are so many people that graduate from college or grad school but don't have a job yet. So they want to go back and live with mom and dad, but they don't want to live with mom and dad. And on the flip side, and as a person, we have a guest house next door. My brother actually lives in it. And so that's been just a huge blessing for us because, my best friend lived in it for a while. My brother lives in it right now. But looking at my parents as they're getting older, they're still in great shape. They're mid 70s, but we've already kind of started thinking through what does that look like. So it's interesting. It's the older generation taking care of the younger, and then the flip side of the younger generation planning to take care of the older generation. But these are so versatile. You can use them, set them up however you want to. What are some of the trends that you've really been seeing with these? And, like what are people using them for? What are some of the design trends? Are there any trends that people really want that a lot of cities won't come through and approve? What is it that you see being so in depth in this market?
So here in California, we're essentially at the forefront of the ADU movement. I'd say Oregon, Washington, Colorado's there too. We're some of the first movers in the space. So it's been really interesting to see how the industry has dynamically changed over the years. I'd say first and foremost from the get-go, the main opportunity was the rental potential. And a lot of investors, a lot of newer just homeowners looking for the opportunity for some passive income directly looked at an ADU as an opportunity for rental income. So they did something fast and cheap and good enough and built something that was rentable. And now, as I've seen the industry change and kind of develop, over the past year, past couple years, I've seen people put a much more significant focus on design, on creating an aesthetic that actually makes sense for the property. So it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb, but actually integrates to the rest of the lot very well. Here in California, I see a lot of people wanting roof decks. I see a lot of useful, creative use of space. I'd say, frankly, by definition, an accessory dwelling unit is a small space. Here, at least, the rules are anywhere from, around 200 square feet, maxing out at up to 1,200 square feet. And often the sweet spot is typically around 6 to 800. And that's either a one bedroom or a two bedroom, but it's small. So I'm seeing some really creative use of that space, unique design elements that are tuned to make a small space look and feel larger and also have way more function. Whether it's Murphy beds come down to open up the floor when it's not needed, or pull out cabinetry and pull out countertops so that it's dynamic, so that it's useful and can be used in different ways at different times. Because it's a small space, people are seeing that it's beneficial to have a dynamic space that can flex the way they need it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We did a rental. We actually was an Airbnb and it was one of these ADUs. But the way it was designed, I mean, everything was like top-notch quality, beautiful countertops. But it's exactly what you're talking about. All of the spaces were designed with really cool features that let the living room kind of transform into part of the kitchen and let it also kind of transform into a space that was really great for, hanging out with guests. And it was interesting to see all of the really well thought out design elements that went into making this space usable for lots of different activities, even though it was a pretty small space. I mean, 6, 7, 800 square feet is not a lot. So we're talking like little kitchen, little bedroom, bathroom. But there are some design elements that really make it feel, I mean, it felt homey and it also felt almost luxurious with the way they had designed it and the way they had decorated. I was so impressed with what they were able to do with such a small space.
Yeah, I'd say one of the biggest things that I'm seeing is movable walls, right? If you have a 600 square foot space, build it out as a studio, an open concept, but have walls that can separate the spaces when necessary. You can host a larger dinner party if you want, or you can have some privacy between the bedroom, the living room, and the kitchen.
So smart. Okay, so I bet this is one question you probably get a lot. It could be your most asked question. We talked a little bit about what it looks like, what it does to your value of your property, of your home, if you add one of these. But talk to us, if you will, a little bit about cost. So if there's someone listening and they're interested in getting started with a project like this, maybe this is something they've been considering for a while. what should homeowners plan to kind of budget? And I'm sure it varies depending on where you are, but what should they budget for a like really high quality ADU build today? And what advice would you give them when considering kind of layout and recommendations on kind of what to think through when getting started? And I know those are big
Sure.
questions. Tell us all your trade secrets, Jon.
These are the most common questions. You named it, right? I can only tell you accurate pricing here in California, which is likely on the upper end of what listeners can expect to spend on these projects. First, I'll say that there are really two forms of getting an ADU. Typically, these are permissible in most areas. It's either new construction where you are building a brand new structure where there's nothing there currently, or it's a conversion of existing space. One of the most common ADU projects that we see is converting a garage into an ADU. So let's say you have a two-car garage, roughly 400 square feet, with relatively minimal effort. That project can take 4 to 6 months of construction time at the most. And a project like that here in California will cost somewhere around 100 to $150,000. So that's the lowest entry level price point for converting an existing space into this ADU. Now, if you're looking at new construction, I'll say to anyone listening, it will probably cost more than you think it'll cost. A lot of people just see, oh, it's a tiny home, it's small. That's actually a hindrance to the project. The larger you build, the lower your cost per square foot, simply because no matter what, the structure needs utilities. It needs foundation, framing, roofing. No matter what, it's going to have a kitchen with all the finishes. It's going to have at least one bathroom with all the finishes. So the larger you build, the more space there is to take up that is not those fixed costs. That said, I'll say that the starting cost per square foot is typically around 300 to $350 per square foot. So that can look like for a 4 to 500 square foot space, new construction, starting around the 150, 175, $200,000 price point. And I will say everything that I'm talking about is just the cost of construction. Homeowners also need to know that there are a few different milestones and a few different elements that go into the project. You will always need to develop plans. You'll either hire an architect or a draftsperson to work with you on the floor plans and the structural, architectural, everything that goes into it. Then you submit those plans to the city. There will be permit fees, there will be submittal fees, typically based on where you're located and the size of the project. And then finally, there's construction costs. And I say construction costs are typically 30% materials, 30 to 40% labor, and the rest is overhead and management fees and things like that. So the best way to know what the project will cost you, the only way to know what the project will cost you is to meet with multiple contractors, get them to bid your project based on what you foresee the scope of work being. Once you have a few numbers together, that should be an indicator of realistically what it's going to cost. I would typically recommend working with a contractor that has experience building ADUs. Then they can speak directly from their experience. If they're not, but they're a savvy contractor, whether they've built ADUs or not, if they have experience with any new construction, with home additions, anything like that, they would typically have at least the savvy necessary to effectively bid your project accurately and get the work done properly.
That's really helpful and a great kind of framework for how to think about that. I'm sure people have gotten pretty far into this and been surprised by some of these additional things that you mentioned that they did not realize were part of the plan. I want to come back and talk about getting bids from contractors, comparing those. We're going to come back to that. But before we move on, I did also want to ask you, for our listeners considering this, you've seen this a bunch, you're the pro. If you could give our listeners a couple of mistakes to avoid, maybe the most common mistakes that you see homeowners make when starting this, what would your advice for them be?
First one I already touched on, always start with your regulations. People get so far ahead of the project by dreaming up what's possible and talking to contractors who may not have ADU experience, or going too far into the process without knowing what's even feasible and possible in your city and specifically on your lot. So always start with that as the first step. Another thing I always say, and anyone listening might be upset to hear it, but I typically say that architects are really good at telling you what's possible. Contractors are really good at telling you what it's going to cost and not vice versa. So along the lines of what I just mentioned previously is I will see people hire an architect, spend weeks, months developing floor plans and all the paperwork necessary, and they submit the project to the city. They pay all the fees, they pay for the permits, and now they go meet with contractors and get bids on those projects. And they're shocked to find out that the scope that architect designed for them is going to cost $400,000 when they had only budgeted 200. So not all architects are that way. Many architects do have experience with the pricing, with the cost of construction that's recent and accurate. But I often see people have an architect develop something that is beautiful, stunning. I would love to live there, but it would cost so much money to build it that it becomes a non-starter. And then they have to go back to the drawing board at square one to really develop something that makes sense, not just for their vision and their dream, but for their budget as well.
Yes, I am the visionary dreamer when it comes to things like I would be the person that if my husband and I decided to do this, I would like start buying accessories and all of like that's how far down the road I would go. And my husband would have to be the one to come back behind me and be like, hey, we should probably go and see actually what's possible and practical before we start decorating it. So I feel like that's probably, I can definitely see how there are plenty of people out there who get pretty far down the road with vision before you look at the math and realize that doesn't always make sense. There's a line that you cross there where it stops being practical. You had mentioned
Right.
some of your advice was to get multiple bids from multiple contractors. Number one, for the purpose of kind of actually giving you a hopefully very realistic expectation of what this would cost. But that can be kind of overwhelming, and you have a tool for that. So tell us a little
I
bit
do.
about Bid Compare AI, which, AI, another space that's massive. Tell us a little bit about how people can utilize Bid Compare AI and what it does.
So I want to start by talking about the problem, right? If you work in the design industry, if you work in engineering, anything in the commercial space, there are rigid standards of conduct of what an estimate needs to look like. In the residential space, in home remodeling and anything like this, there is next to no standardization. And that means if you meet with three, five contractors and give them the identical scope of work, if you give them that plan set that you worked with your architect on and say, hey, can you give me bids on this project? You're going to receive five different bids that look totally different. One bid might be perfectly laid out with a line by line scope of work, priced one by one. And then you'll get another estimate that says bathroom, it's going to cost this. Kitchen, it's going to cost this. And then you'll get another bid that's in the form of an email and maybe you have 15 sentences to work with, right? So no two bids ever look the same. And for an average homeowner, and even for professionals, it makes it really, really difficult to evaluate those estimates. And one of the big red flags, or one of the big issues that I see, calling back to your question previously, is that homeowners get three bids, they pick the lowest price, and they think that they're getting the best deal. And unfortunately, if you get five bids for a project, four of them are around $100,000, and one of those bids is 70, do you think that $70,000 bid, that contractor is a magic maker? Do you think he found some secret way to build for cheap? Most of the time, whether it's nefarious or not, that contractor is missing something. And either they don't have the right experience to properly bid the project, or they are trying to underbid the project intentionally so that they can win your business, lock you in, and then sneak in change orders halfway through. Or they misread the bid and missed something. And if you go back to the contractor and clarify that with them, they'll realize that they messed up on the bid and they'll have to go and modify it. So either way, when you get multiple bids from contractors, it's really, really important that you're able to compare them apples to apples to truly know which of those bids is the best one, is the most reasonable, the most comprehensive, and so on. And what that looks like for a professional like me, it takes over an hour, multiple hours sometimes, to go through each bid line by line, figure out what is included in each, what is the price point for each thing, what materials are included in these bids, which ones are owner provided. There's so much to look into. And it's always been a service that we've offered for free for our clients, but it's time consuming, it's difficult even for us to do. But we have the expertise to do it. And as a technology nerd that I've been my whole life, I knew that there had to be a way to utilize the incredible capabilities of AI to streamline the process. So I've developed this tool called Bid Compare AI. It's available for free for anyone who wants to use it on my Great Builds website, and it makes the process super easy. Now, instead of spending hours reviewing these estimates and lining them up side by side, you upload any estimate that you've received, whether it's a PDF or otherwise, and in a few minutes you receive two things. One, you get the bid comparison spreadsheet. It's an Excel doc that takes all the bids you submitted and puts them side by side, lines up all the scope items. If there's a price associated with it, it'll pop in that price. If there's no price, it'll tell you whether it is included, is not included, or it's unsure. And that's helpful. So you can actually spread the bids evenly and see what's included and what's not. I will tell you, especially for a larger project like an ADU, it's still going to be over 100 lines of data that can still be somewhat difficult to process, to really understand, like, okay, there's some red marks here, but what do I do with that? What does it mean? So in addition to that spreadsheet, homeowners also receive a bid analysis report. And that walks them through in plain English. Here's the three bids you received. Here's the key factors to identify that you should pay attention to in each of these bids. Here, this bid was missing these details, and that would potentially explain why it's $10,000 cheaper than the next bid. And then finally, it gives homeowners follow-up questions. It gives them real insights that they can go back to their contractors with and say, hey, I noticed that HVAC was not mentioned in your estimate. I noticed that the flooring, the square footage was off from what I have in my plans. Can you clarify these details with me? And that'll help you get true comparable bids that you can compare side by side, apples to apples, and it really helps homeowners understand more about the bids they received and make a more informed decision on which contractor to hire and which bid is the most comprehensive.
So this is exactly something, it is exactly like what someone like me would need. I'm not in this industry. I would get very overwhelmed by looking at different bids in different forms. I would feel extremely panicky. It feels like with Bid Compare AI, what you've done is you've kind of like created a virtual best friend who it's like having a best friend who works in the business where you can say, hey, these are the things that I've gotten. Can you look at these and tell me what I'm missing, what to ask, what inconsistencies there are? So I think that's an incredibly valuable tool. And my follow-up question on that is, if I were considering this project, I would absolutely use Bid Compare AI, and I would also be willing to pay quite a bit for it because it's going to save me a lot of money and a lot of stress on the back end. But you put it on your website, it's free. It's completely free and it doesn't even make you log in. So, talk to us about why having this be such an accessible tool is so important to you.
So, at the core of my Great Builds brand, our ethos is helping good people work with good people. And a term that I don't know if I've seen it somewhere, but I think I coined it. I call it the homeowner contractor knowledge imbalance. Look, every contractor, whatever, they do it every day. They spend all their life giving estimates, doing projects. They know the lingo, they know how to sell homeowners on their projects. So they know so much more about the space, whereas the average homeowner only remodels once every few years. So when it comes to meeting with contractors, knowing the right questions to ask, and certainly comparing bids, there's such a knowledge imbalance that it puts the homeowner at such a disadvantage. And like we already talked about, that leads them to just make a gut decision. I like this guy, the bid's cheaper, so I think I'm getting a better deal. I'm sure I'll be fine. And really, the reason we build great builds, the reason we exist as a service is to really give that homeowner so much more authority in the space. Level the playing field and give them the expertise that they need and the guidance that I think they so crave to really compete on the same level with the contractors they're meeting with. So certainly I built this tool primarily for my clientele because they're getting bids from our contractors, they're getting bids from different contractors, and I want to make sure that they have that expertise to make the right decision, not just hire the contractor with the lowest bid, but hire the right contractor that's going to treat them with respect, and also give them a fair price, not just the cheapest bid, but a fair bid. And directly related to that, I built that tool for this purpose, but I knew that the impact that we could have is so much greater if I can make this tool accessible to anyone, anywhere. It costs next to nothing for us to operate it. The tool seems to work fairly well. And at the end of the day, maybe someday I will add some extra features. And if people want to pay for it, they certainly can, or buy me a coffee at least. But at the end of the day, I know that our ethos, our mission as a brand at Great Builds is helping homeowners and providing them the support, guidance, and resources that they need to proceed with the remodeling project confidently. And just like the Bid Compare AI tool that I have available on my website for free, all of the hundreds of articles that are guidance, resources, interview questions to ask contractors, what to expect during a kitchen remodel, how does the permitting process work, I've created this content certainly because I want homeowners to learn about us and find our service and utilize us to get contractors. But at the end of the day, I know that this content is out there to help anyone and everyone. Frankly, we currently only operate in California, but I have people visiting my websites from throughout the country, all over the world. And I know that there's nothing directly that I can do to profit off of that traffic. But frankly, it doesn't matter because I know if those resources are helpful and people are getting any benefit out of it, I'm going to keep doing it.
I love that. And before we run out of time, I do want to mention how interesting it is to me. You touched on this a minute ago when you said, that it has a list of questions that these people can go back and ask the contractor and all these things. Obviously, using this tool helps, clients when they're trying to find the right contractor. I would imagine it also really saves a lot of headaches for contractors as well, because they have clients coming into this with a little bit more knowledge. They know some questions to ask, maybe something that the contractor just automatically understands as part of it that the client has questions about or doesn't understand. I would imagine your feedback from the contractor side of this tool is also really good, except for those shady contractors. I bet they don't like you very much. The ones trying to
Right.
pull something over and really underbid and then sneak the cost up later, I bet they don't really like you at all. But the really good contractors, I bet, appreciate this work that you're doing. Do you ever get feedback from them on this tool?
You're exactly right. And you nailed it. The bad contractors, the shady ones, the ones trying to pull a fast one, they hate it because this tool won't let them pass through. But the good contractors, any of the contractors in my network certainly praise the tool very strongly because at the end of the day, like we already talked about, someone might get three bids, 40, 55, and 53. A
Yeah.
lot of the contractors in my network that give fair, honest bids are maybe in the 50s for that project, and they're upset that they continue to lose projects to that $40,000 bid. And I follow up with every single client, whether they hire one of my contractors or if they move forward with someone else. And I try to get as much feedback and information from them. Partially, I'm selfish. If they hire another contractor and they do a great job, I want to bring that contractor into my network too. But
Right.
unfortunately, I often learn that homeowner who hired a contractor because it was a lower bid, they ended up in a remodel nightmare. That project ended up snowballing to end up being double the price, or the contractor took their money and disappeared. And I hate hearing stories like that. I hate renovation nightmares because they're just so ubiquitous. So knowing that I can play even a small role in helping those homeowners make well-informed decisions makes me feel good about it. And I know that my contractors that are also honest and reliable people, they appreciate it as well.
I think here in a few years, you will actually begin to see the impact of how the work that you're doing is really revolutionizing this space. So, on behalf of all of the laymen just getting into this industry, we really appreciate all of your efforts. Is there anything else you want our listeners to know?
Well, we've talked a lot about comparing bids, but I think that's just one small piece in the greater ecosystem of evaluating contractors. When we started Great Builds, we knew that vetted contractors would be the cornerstone of our existence, and especially in a place like Los Angeles. And there's so many other places like it that are so populous. There's in LA County, there are over 20,000 licensed general contractors. So if you're just going to pick one from a hat, there's a study not long ago that Angie's List did, and they concluded that over 50%, I think it was 52% of homeowners who hired a contractor had a negative experience with them.
Mm.
And that's just astonishing. That means out of 20,000 contractors, one in two, you might end up in a renovation nightmare. So vetting contractors is one of the most important things you can do to ensure a successful project. I have tons of resources on my website on what you can do, how to properly evaluate contractors. Never meet with the contractor if they do not have a license, insurance, and a bond. That is a bare minimum. And one last thing that I'll say is a story I love to tell, and that meeting with contractors is very similar to dating. Okay. And we kind of call ourselves renovation matchmakers for that reason, because on that first meeting with a contractor, just like on a first date, everyone's going to be on their best behavior. They're going to put their best foot forward. They're going to show you pretty pictures and say everything they can to impress you and get you to love them. But just like with dating, it's the follow through that really proves who's quality, who's trustworthy, who's good with communication. So pay special attention to not just that first meeting, but what comes after it. If your contractor is communicative, if they promise you that you'll get an estimate by Friday and it comes without you having to follow up, that's a really good sign. On the flip side, if you text a contractor for an update while you're collecting bids and they don't get back to you for 2 weeks, that experience may only get worse once you start working with them and hire them on your project. So just like dating, it's really important to ask the deeper questions, to have multiple meetings with any contractor you're considering hiring, and really dig deeper. Talk to references, look at photos and videos of their work. If you can go visit a job site, do it, because that's one of the best ways to separate the good from the bad, to truly extract the quality contractors. Because the bad contractors, the more digging you do, you're sure to find something. The good contractors, their past clients would love to talk about their amazing experience. Good contractors love showing photos of their work. And that is the best way to ensure that your project does not become a renovation nightmare.
That is, I love the term renovation nightmare. That's something we can all cringe at internally. We've all heard those stories. Well, I really appreciate all of the wisdom. I feel like I owe you a coffee next time I make it to California, just from all of the free tips and tricks that you've given us. And for all of our listeners, we're excited that you guys were here with us as well. My guest today was Jon Grishpul, and to get connected with Jon and learn about all of the cool different things that he talked about today, you can check out Great Builds, that's with a Z.com, and that's also where you can utilize the Bid Compare AI tool. You can also check out maximalspace.com to learn more information about how AI is kind of working in this industry. And Jon, thank you so much for being on the show and giving us all of your tips and tricks. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Katie. This has been a fun conversation.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.